I was born on the 15th of May 1907 here in Marple, and I can explain just where I was born. You'll know Union Road, and then from Union Road down to the post office there's a row of little shops. There used to be cottages, and in those cottages, the 4th bedroom window down, there I was born. And so I thought I'd just have a chat and talk about Marple as I remembered it. I suppose where to start in Marple? Well, to me in those days, the most remarkable thing were the 2 halls. I said 2. There was Marple Hall, of course, and that's where the Bradshaw Isherwoods lived. But of course there was another hall, Brabbins Hall. Anyway, that later. The Bradshaw Isherwoods, yes, lived at Marple Hall, and I have here a picture of the hall as it was. You see, no. I've got one little thing I used to do, and that was to draw things. I used to like to draw, and so I drew the hall, and that's what it looked like. Very nice, very pleasant little place. And by the side of the hall you had the stables and the gardener's cottage. You notice I said stables and not garage, because in those days, of course, there were no motor cars. There were just horses. They came in carriages. Now, the squire, that was Bradshaw Isherwood, and his wife used to come in a carriage, an open carriage, up into the village, usually on Fridays, to do some shopping. And they would come into Market Street, and there they would cause a terrific commotion. I remember being in the newsagent shop, which is in the same place as the newsagent is now, and the manager of the shop suddenly rushed in shouting, "Here, the squire's here, quick, quick, to your places, to your places." And everybody had to rush round and stand to attention whilst Bradshaw Isherwood came in and paid for his papers. When you think of it. And there, the Marple Hall. And then, as I grew up a little while, the hall was demolished. All the Isherwoods had died, and the hall was to be taken down. But before that, they had a sale of the stuff that was in the hall, such as armour, old tables, old chairs, pictures, and that was done in a large marquee that was built just outside the hall. And I went to that sale. Strangely enough, I went with Mr. Vernon, who had a shop in Marple where he sold furniture and so on. And his grandson Eric was a friend of mine, and so we both went with Grandpa Vernon down to the sale. He said he was going to buy some silver, and we went into the marquee, and there were a lot of people sitting down, and we stood at the back, and Grandpa Vernon suddenly said, "I've had it. It's no good me coming here. You see that front row of men there? They're from London, and they're all silver men, and they've come for the silver. And no matter what I do, I shall never be allowed to buy anything." But the thing I remember most about that sale was standing at the back of the room was a tall lady in grey, all dressed in grey, and she was looking very, very sad, almost tears as she looked at the sale of all the, obviously a Bradshaw Isherwood. And I still remember seeing that lady now. It's amazing. And in the outbuildings there there was a cottage, I told you, stables, and a cottage for a man, the gardener, who was Coyne. And when the hall was closed, Coyne got another job in which he was very prominent in Marple, and that was the gardener up at the new park, where the council offices are. And there he looked after the bowling green and the tennis courts. And his family were well known in the district. Now, let's go down to Marple Hall, or Brabbins Hall rather. We've finished with Marple Hall. Brabbins Hall. The entrance to Brabbins Hall, if you go down towards the station and you're just crossing the Canal Bridge, there is a cottage there leading a drive going into the wood. And that's it. It was there, the entrance. And the drive goes down, for at least, I should say, quarter to half a mile. The bottom. As you go down Brabbins Brown now, there's a large wall. And behind that wall, there is still a nice little pond. And it was there, at the far end of the pond, that Brabbins Hall stood. Now, Miss Fanny Hudson lived at Brabbins Hall, and she was a remarkably handsome old lady. And it was obvious that when she was young, she must have been a very beautiful girl. And so we all wondered, we all wondered why on earth she was still Miss Hudson. Well, the story is quite clear. She was engaged to an officer in London, an officer, and they were to be married. And she went as a bride to St. Margaret's Church there near Westminster, and as she went in there, they told her the bridegroom hadn't turned up. And as she came out, Fanny Hudson said, "I shall never marry." And she didn't. Two interesting things. The first, each Friday, Miss Hudson came up into the village, went to the butcher's, Lomas, and there said to him just the same, "Mr. Lomas, this week." And that meant that little packages of meat, quite a number of them, were to be sent from the widows and old people in Marple, and she paid for them. And the other thing of interest was the people at Brabbins Hall, Miss Hudson and the Bradshaw Ishwoods, used to visit each other, going to each other's homes. But they were the only two visits they ever made. None of the other people in the village ever went to as guests to Marple Hall or Brabbins Hall. In the war, however, Miss Hudson turned her home, I lent her home as a hospital. And I distinctly remember it. The soldiers, wounded soldiers in blue, used to walk it around the village, and there they were at the hall. Now, let's look at some changes in the village as we know it. First of all, let's take Market Street. You see, today in Market Street, you can't take any vehicle, car, anything into the street. When I was a boy, of course, cars went through, horse-drawn vehicles went through. What was it like? Well, let me start at the Stockport Road end of Market Street. As you went in, on the left-hand side was a large cooperative wholesale shop, grocers, and it was, for those days, it was a very big shop. On the opposite side of the road, on the right, the cooperative wholesale had furniture departments and so on, and a little shop on its own where it sold menswear, tailors department. As you then went up the street, past the co-op on the left, you came to a large building, the Primitive Methodist Chapel and Sunday School. And what I really remember about that the most, when we were young men, in our late teens, if we would, on Sundays sometimes we would say, let's have a good sing. Let's go to the Prims, because the Prims really sang. And so we'd go to the Prims for the evening service. And then going along were a row of small cottages. And of course, the Bull's Head was still there, as you would expect. And going along still on the left-hand side, a few shops, particularly the butcher's was there. And then, of course, at the end, the Pineapple. That was obviously there. On the right, there was nothing important, really. I've explained how there was the shop, newspaper shop, where and so on, and then a few cottages. One of the cottages, however, to me, I shall not forget it, because Mrs. Pickford lived there. And Mrs. Pickford had, I think it was 4 sons. And her youngest son, Freddie Pickford, was my hero and the hero of most of the young people in the village. Why? Because he played the big drum in the Boys' Brigade band. You see, anybody could play a kettle drum. Anybody could blow a bugle. But to play the big drum, only Freddie Pickford could do that. Came the war, 1914-18, and the sons went to the war. And as time went on, first one and then the next, she had her telegrams to say they had been killed in the war. The first 3, quite quickly that happened. But at least we used to say to us, good, at least Freddie's still there. Freddie's still with him. We shall see Freddie again playing his big drum. And the armistice came. And we said, good, Freddie's all right. And the next morning, after the armistice, she got a telegram. Freddie never returned. Never returned. So, Market Street. Now, where's the next big change? Oh, Union Road, I suppose. You know where the baths are and so on, the Union Road. As you go from Stockport Road, turn right into Union Road, the houses are on the left, and they were still there, the same houses. On the right, there's a large building. I think it's got something to do with electricity. Well, in my day, it wasn't there, and that was open ground. And my word, what an important piece of ground that was. That's where all we young people played when we were before we got to our teens. We played our cricket and our football and everything, and that ground was terribly important to me. And that was Union Road. That's where a big change was there. I suppose the biggest change was now up Church Lane, Hibbert Lane, the Church Lane, Hibbert Lane crossing. Now it's just a crossing with a roundabout. But when I was a lad, it was a most remarkable corner, that. It was large and open, because going up on the left, the Atter's Arms was still there. You notice all the pubs are always there. And on the right-hand side, as you got up to the corner, Mrs. Nadin's shop was there, where we got our sweeties. And then on the left, there was a gap in which there was the Gem Cinema, our first cinema. Oh, and that's where we spent our Saturday sixpence. Mrs. Nadin's first for a few sweets, and then just a few coppers into the cinema. And but on the right was a large farm, Sutton's farm, and it was quite big, and outbuildings were there, and great fun for us because Mr. Sutton occasionally would let us go into the farm and have a look round. On the left, to finish the open space there, was a most beautiful cottage, a lovely cottage, Fernley's cottage. And the family, Fernley, quite a large family, lived there. And surprise, surprise, only a few days ago, in the village, a lady came up to me, an old lady, and introduced herself, May Fernley. So the Fernleys are still there. And where's the other change? Well, take Rose Hill Station. What a change there. There is still sort of a station. What a silly little thing it is. And the single line does come up to the station again from Manchester. I don't think it's a very good service, but when I was a boy, that line went straight on. As you can see now, you can walk up it, and there it is. It went up to High Lane, to Middlewood, to Higher Poynton, to Bollington, to Macclesfield. Now I know that line very well, because as a boy I went for many years to King's School, Macclesfield. It was Macclesfield Grammar School then. And I was a boy at Albert School, which was on Church Lane. And the headmaster, Fred Pennington. I always think of Fred Pennington with a cane in his hand. He used it often and very well. And for the first time, apparently, King's Macclesfield was to allow boys from Marple to take scholarships. Boys from Marple. So Pennington sent for Freddie Hoole and myself, and we were going to be the first two boys to take the scholarship. And we both took it, and we both passed. And for many years, therefore, we went from Rosehill Station right up through High Lane, Middlewood, Lower Point and Bollington to King's Macclesfield, or Macclesfield Grammar School. And that is, of course, therefore, another big change. And I suppose another thing I can remember well was in Stockport Road, on the opposite side from the Jolly Sailor, there were two smithies. They shoed horses, and we could stand and watch and put horseshoes on, or they covered wheels. It was that was a very interesting spot. Now, let's go to Marple now and say where people worked when I was a boy. Well, there were connected two mills. There was the Hollins Mill and the Goyet Mill. The Hollins Mill was where the large car park is now, on Hollins Lane there, and the large shop is now the cooperative wholesale shop. That was a mill, and it was a big mill too. Well, because I used to go daily, very often in parts of the year, with Ronnie Jackson, who was my best pal, and his dad was the engineer at the mill. Jackson and Arden were the engineers in the beautiful engine shop, clean as a new pin. And there were two men who were highly respected in the village as engineers at the mill. And we used to take his dinner in a little basket. So I knew Hollins Mill very well. And to see the people working, I said work there. One difference from then and today, they didn't come wearing coats and hats. The ladies all wore shawls, different colours and so on, but they came in their shawls. to the mill. On the other hand, you had the Goyt Mill, and you know that's up Hibbert Lane, at the beginning almost of Hawk Green, there by the canal. And I always think that's a wonderful mill, because if you go into Cheshire, so many miles, you can still look and see the Goyt Mill. It's a terrific landmark. No, the engineer at the Goyt Mill, at least I knew his son. And we went once there to have a look round. And he said to me, have you ever been up on the roof? Because the Goyt Mill has a flat roof, which is unusual. Have you ever been up on the roof? I said, no. Well, come on. And he took us up onto the roof. And the roof is flat. But on the top of the roof is a lake. 18 inches of water is there. What on earth is this for? I said. Do people skate here? He said, they actually do in winter. He said, no, but the idea is that on the floor of this lake are certain little spots that if the mill ever got on fire, they would melt and the water would come through. And that was what it was for. Well, the Goyt Mill has never got on fire, but the water did come through one very, very hot summer's day. So they know at least that it does work. Yes. Now, when I was a boy, where did we go for excitement or for fun? Well, I suppose up to my teens, our great place to go was down the Dale. Down Bowden Lane, down the Dale, and where now there is a hospital. There wasn't before. There was a little children's nursing home down there, and then we went down to the Dale. And I remember just as the Dale started, and I don't know, I must admit whether it's still there. There were two large trees growing, and their roots were well above the ground. And to us, that was the owl's nest. And we used to sit in the roots, and that was great fun. And then we went down into the Dale at different times of the year. We went later in the summer to collect blackberries, so that our mums would go with us, of course, to use in cooking. And when you went right down the Dale, down to the river, there was quite a flat portion there, and we would play cricket down there in our childish way. It was very exciting. But when we came to our teens, there was far more exciting things to do. We went down to the old mill. Now, follow me carefully. We go out of the village, and we go over Posset Bridge, and we go down the private road. And down there on the right was the Stone Row cottages, and there were three sides of a rectangle where work people used to work, because down in the bottom of the road was a mill, an old mill, Old Nose Mill. We go on down, and there were large gates there, private gates, and they had to be opened by a man who lived in a cottage nearby. Then down, we could walk down the road, until we came to the bottom, where the Goyt was running, and a bridge over the Goyt to the old mill. Each side the Goyt was a large house, large stone house. On this side, first you came to Marple Lodge. On the far side, you came to Mellor Lodge. And probably Old Low lived in one, and probably a mill manager lived in the other. Old Marple Lodge, Mellor Lodge. Now, there is, if ever you can find it, there is a book. I think the title is Hilary on Her Own. I don't know who the author is, but the first chapter is in Marple. And a young lady, a young girl lives at Marple Lodge, and a young boy lives at Mellor Lodge. And they gaze across the river at each other, and they wave to each other, but they never meet. And they live, it's an interesting, but chapter 2, oh no, never mentioned again is Marple, and you're in London, and of course it comes to a good ending, and they do meet finally. But and so we went over the bridge, and there was the ruins of Old Nose Mill. On the left, as you got over the bridge, and they were still standing. The chimneys were, the windows were broken, but the mills were still standing, and on the left were the old offices. And we used to go into there and get through the windows, around the floor, scraping with our feet. And we found bits of paper on the floor. And as a youth, I remember finding a letter, which was a bill of sale for orphans from London orphanages. Old No used to buy them to work in his mill. And they lived going over the bridge a bit round the corner. When you come to that entrance to the lakes, there was the old hall there, still standing, the old hall, and that's where the orphans were boarded, in the hall. Now, again, as you crossed over, you passed the offices, there were some old buildings still up there, and so on, and here was the exciting bit. Standing up in the field towards Mellor, about a quarter of a mile, I should think, from the mill, was a large chimney. And it was erect, and when I was a boy, it was still in perfect condition, the chimney. But in the mill itself, we knew a hole in the ground, which was down into the flue, which went up to the chimney. And as youths, many times we used to go down to the old mill with candles, light the candles, go down into the flue, and bent double, we used to creep up this hole, right up to the bottom of the chimney. A long trek it would be, terrible. And then we're at the bottom of the chimney, we could look up into the sky. It was an amazing journey. But later, when I think of it, and think what might have happened if, whilst we were up at the bottom of the chimney, part of the flue had fallen down, they would never have known where we were. But that was very exciting to us. Very, very exciting. Now, another thing which is there, which is up on that side, which very, very few people have seen, I think. If you go past the old hall, and past the farm that is behind it there, you come to the woods that begin at the bottom of Mellor Golf Club. Now, if you take this low side of that wood, and you get over the wall and you walk along there, there's no path. You walk along that wood quite a long way until you are quite a long way up there. There is an old seat, Old Nose seat, and it just composed of 4 large flat stones. 2 uprights, which hold the back, long back, the third one, and then the seat to sit on. And the story we used to know was that Old Nose seat, that's where Old Nose himself, the owner of the mill, used to go in the evening, especially in summer, walk up there and sit on the seat and look at his mill and the old hall and the farm, and that was his life, and they used to live. Now, that was that one. Now, what next I remember? Oh, well, when we were young people and young children, the delights of the canal. What a wonderful thing our canal is when you think of it. And by the way, rather unique in the history of canals. Because you think you go down, you know the way down, I won't take you. You go down to the aqueduct, and there the canal is brought over the Goyt River. And there the aqueduct, I know there's a viaduct by the side of it now, but you come over the aqueduct to the bottom lock. Up, because it's quite a long pull. And I should think right from there up to the top lock must be at least almost a mile. And you slowly walk up lock after lock. And there are some people who say it's a record for England for a climb. I'm not sure of that. But we used to love to walk up and there up the locks until we got up to the top lock. And there on the top lock lived the family Jimmy Jinks. And Jinks, quite a family, 2 sons, well known in the village. And there was a dry dock there. And Jinks, therefore, in his dry dock, used to build barges and mend and repair barges. And he got Barnes, was, I remember, a man who worked for him. And there they built their boats. But the most fascinating thing about the top lock and the opening there is suddenly the canal branches into two branches. One goes off to the left. You're going off through Strine, above Strines, New Mills, Whaley Bridge, and off right up to Whaley Bridge. Now start again on the top lock and go on the right-hand branch, and you come past the Goyt Mill, because of course the Goyt Mill and the Olives Mill were both served by barges, and their raw material brought to them and their finished goods taken away by barges. And you go past there on this right-hand bridge until you come to High Lane, Middlewood, Upper Poynton, Bollington, Macclesfield. And Macclesfield is about 7 or 8 miles, I suppose, from Marple. And the canal, and the beautiful thing about the canals, and all of this, of course, is, let us think, the men who built the canals and all those locks, they were Irishmen, Irish navvies who built it. Their name, real name, of course, their title is navigators, Irish navigators. And they began to work up. And of course, by the time, whenever they were working, they'd have to stop to have meals and a drink and that. And so, on the Posset Bridge there, in Marple, they built the Navigation Hotel for them. And that was where the navigators came and had their beer. And so you get another rather fascinating thing. So we have the canal, and what a wonderful place it is. The nicest thing about the canal to me is, once you're up on the Whaley Bridge stretch or the Macclesfield stretch, the towpath there, it's flat walking. And you can walk on the towpath, you can walk right up to Macclesfield or to Whaley Bridge the other way. And since, say, at Macclesfield it joins up to other canals, you can still walk a long way. I've walked from Macclesfield once as a boy when it was frosty, and the canal was covered in ice, and the headmaster at morning prayers announced an ice holiday, and we were all dismissed. And from Marple we decided to walk back on the canal side. Now, let's have a quick look at Marple, the games that Marple were played in Marple. Well, first of all, cricket was obviously played in Marple. Oh, by the way, football has never been, somehow, I don't know why, There have been Marple football teams, but they've never amounted to much, and I don't know that there are any now. But Marple always had a cricket field, and it was down by Rosal Station. After you pass the Midland Hotel, down there, just by the old gates, was a large cricket field on the left-hand side of the road. Came the 1418 war, and the farmer, the silly idiot, he actually ploughed the field up. So when the war was over, there was no cricket field. And then for many, many years, there was no cricket club. But now, thank goodness, for quite a time, along Bowden Lane, there's now again a Marple cricket field. And let's look round. Where were the others cricket fields? Well, there was a Strines cricket field. That would surprise you. If you go on Strines Road, and you go down to Strines, you will see on the left the print works. Well, part of the print works was built. Some firm bought the print works, and they bought the ground, which was the cricket field as well, and they extended the print works onto the cricket field. So Strines cricket field finished, and it was a lovely little ground, beautiful ground. Then Hawk Green, yes, that's always had a cricket club. But when I was a lad, I actually played for them for a time. The field was where it says Hawk Green, right in front of the hotel, on the opposite side of the road. And as it is now, a footpath crosses that road to go to the chapel on top of the ridge there. And when we were playing cricket, the path still went across. And as you were playing, people would walk across it and go. And it was a rough and rocky place to play cricket. But there was a sort of square. So I remember the first match I ever played there, the captain said to me, "Where do you field, Fred?" I said, anywhere on the square. And so I stopped on the square. Comstall, there always had a cricket field there, and a good cricket field. It is indeed. And I again played with Comstall for a time, and that was interesting. And that field still today, and as you go into it on the left-hand side is a railings. Railings are which are a field behind it. And there a great tragedy happened many, many years ago. At the bottom of Brabbin's Brow, on the right-hand side, where the car park is now, was a big house. Dr. Hibbert lived there, a doctor. And he played cricket for Comstall. And quite often, the ball would be knocked by a hard-hitting man over the railings into the field, the opposite side. And there was a part of it that you could open to get through. And Dr. Hibbert was playing and fielding in that area. The ball went over. And instead of opening the gate, he said, "It's all right, I'll climb over, no trouble." And he climbed up the railing and caught his foot in the top and fell over to the other side. And when they went to him, he said, "I've had it. I've broke my back, and my neck's broken." And he was right. And he died. And that was the tragedy. And so there were the cricket fields. May I just for a second go back to the canal? When I was a small boy, I was walking with my mother in the village, and suddenly there's quite a commotion. And from the canal, walking down in the middle of Stockport Road, an old lady was coming, carrying a young boy in her arms, wrapped in a cloth, and water was running from him. It was her grandson, And apparently he'd been playing near the lock and he'd drowned. And my mother deliberately took me towards him to watch it carefully as a warning to be careful. Well, back to the games of the area. The other game that was played quite a lot in the village, still is played, was lacrosse. Marple had a lacrosse team. When I was a boy, played near the church, up Church Lane. Changed at the Ring the Bells Hotel. But there came a time when we could no longer collect enough people because Mellor had started the lacrosse team. It was started really and put together by their fathers, and it was a very go-ahead team. It had worked its way up from the 5th division of the lacrosse world up to the Division 1. So Marple gave up, and two of us, Pat Sinclair and myself, went across to play with Mellor. And that was a wonderful experience, great fun. The other thing, I suppose, in the village, you might say, was the swimming bath, the erection of swimming baths, so that swimming became quite something to do in the village. And the swimming baths were given by Mrs. McNair. Mrs. McNair, who lived near up by the church, yes, by Church Lane, she lived. And it's a lovely, lovely place. Still is very nice inside. In the winter, the bath used to be covered over with a floor so that you could have dances in winter. I don't know whether it still does or not. I don't think so. I think the bath is open all winter. But Mrs. McNair, it was always said in the village, I could never believe it, the baths were built, she gave them money, for £12,000. It seems a ridiculous amount now when you think of it. But there it was. And last of all was the recreation ground. I think that was probably given by Carver. Carver, who owned the Hollins Mill, and Carver, where now the council officers used to live in that house. And also then he gave the Carver Gymnasium on Church Lane, where now the Carver Dramatic Society owns it and works. So all those things were there. And just a moment, just a quick one of Marple Police. It's because I must mention them, because there's one name there I can never forget. Sergeant McFall. And the Marple Police Station was on Stockport Road down by the Bowden Lane entrance, just at the corner there. And Sergeant McFall, who became a neighbour of mine when I was first married down near Strines, Sergeant McFall was the man around. And he had, I suppose, the biggest voice I've ever heard. It wasn't a voice, it was a bellow. And he always said, he kept order in Marple by his voice, because wherever he went, people heard him coming, because he always talked to anybody or shouted at anybody he saw. Oh yes, Sergeant McFall. We had one, I can only remember one really nasty tragedy in Marple, when a young lady who lived in a shop in Market Street, a family there, one young lady, was assaulted, physically assaulted by two men on a motorbike, two strangers. She still stupidly got on the bike with them, was taken over Hawk Green, and there she was assaulted. They caught the men, and they put them in the police station down where I told you. But they both denied it, of course. It wasn't them, nothing to do with it. And Sergeant McFall was always very proud to tell me how he sold it for us. He said, we put them in different cells. And then I went into one cell and said, well, you've had it now. your pal has just, he's confessed. But he said it was your idea and you did it. And he's blaming you. And immediately this lad said, rubbish, it was his idea, it wasn't mine. So you see, that's how you get 'em. I had 'em. In this large voice. And there was his story. Well, just two other little things I think I remember. The chapel on top of the Ridge Chapel. I went there at least once every year with my father and mother to the Messiah. They always gave the only big rendering of the Messiah in Marple, and people came from churches all round about, and the choir was made up of choirs from round about. But the thing that really mattered was the singers. And when I was 16, we went up, and instead of going into the bulk of the congregation with my mother, my father said, come on, you're coming with me. You're singing Western choir, you're in the Messiah, you know it. So we went in. And there was the great bass singer, local man, Hamilton Harris. We always said, and probably right, that he was known as the finest bass singer in England. He was known in all the Manchester and further concerts. A big man living in Mellor with a tremendous voice. And he said to us, to my father, Charlie, I've got a treat for you tonight. I've got a young lass. She's one of my students, a young lass, to sing soprano. Her name is Isabel Bailey. And there, for the first time, we heard this girl sing the Messiah. She was only a girl. Of course, later, she became one of the best-known singers in England. Isabel Bailey, or Bella Bailey as she was known. But the big thing about the Messiah was to hear Hamilton Harris sing, especially when it came to why do the nations so furiously rage together? And we got to that part, he stood up. He put his chair back out of the way. He put his book on the chair. And there he looked round, and there was his brother, who was solo trumpeter in the Halley, always came to the Messiah. He nodded to his brother, yep. He looked round the entire congregation. And then he turned up to the organist, nodded, and stood. And he began. Why do the nations so furiously rage together? And believe me, he did furiously rage. I've never heard anything like it in my life. Furious he was. Hamilton Harris.
Remember Peace Farm opposite the Jolly Sailor?
Yes, I do indeed. I'm glad you mentioned it, because I couldn't remember the name of the farm, and I couldn't remember the name of the farmer. And yet, his daughter, Sergeant McFall married his daughter. Do you remember what she was called?
The name was Steele.
Steele's farm. That's why, and I'll tell you why I remember Steele's farm, because as you just go up Church Lane, the farm was there, and then came a lovely orchard, and you turn right going up there, and the lovely orchard, I remember in there, the pears, not the apples so much, pear trees. And we used to nip over occasionally for a pear. But my golly, Cushy Steele he was known as. Cushy, why Cushy? And Cushy Steele, yes, used to really rush us out. Yes, Steele, thank you. He had a great beard, that's true, yes.
Do you remember the toll cottage at the bottom of Dam Bank? Was that?
I do indeed. At the bottom of Tan Bank was a round cottage. And by the way, at the top of Church Lane, opposite the church, was a round house on the right. A round house. What it was like inside, I often wondered. Were the walls of the rooms round? Anyway, but there was a toll cottage there, and as you went down Dooley Lane there were some cottages on the right-hand side. And there were some peculiar people lived down there, and one was called Buxton, I remember. And there was a man who used to flop his way around Marple called Baldy Buxton. And I don't know why it was called Baldy Buxton, but I remember them very well down there. Yes, and that old bridge down. Oh, and down there, you must go and see something. You go down Dooley Lane, you turn left over the bridge over the Goyt, then you turn right to go up to Romley, and very shortly, within 100 yards, there's a little lane off to the right, and it says Chadkirk Church. Chad's Church, or Chadkirk. And if you go along there, you come to a little old church, and it's being kept. It's supposed to be St. Chad or somebody who's lived there, and it's being kept in beautiful condition, and it's just been got painted and decorated. It's in beautiful condition. But you ought to see Chad's Church. Quite a small place. The Roman lakes. And by the way, if you go past the Roman lakes then, you come to a little bridge over the Goyt, the Roman Bridge. Why it was called Roman, I haven't the slightest idea. Olno must have had them built and made. The lakes were obviously provide water for his mill. And the bridge, I know what that was for. The bridge was specially built by him to allow his work people from the Strines area to come to the mill, to save them having to walk up into Marple and down the private road. So that was. And just go and examine the Roman Bridge. And there it is, and you can see. It's absolutely simple design of a bridge. They must have started from each side of the river, and as they built out the curve, they would support it until they got right to the middle, and then the last keystone was put in, whoop, and it tied the whole bridge together, and it couldn't fall down. And it's like that today, and it's never been altered. As far as I know, it's never had to be touched, and you can walk over it just as easily today. Marple Lakes was a great place for picnics and Sunday school, and it used to have some boards to dance built, and there on the weekends, and especially in the summer, trainloads of people would come out from Manchester and come down that private road from Marple Bridge over to the lakes to dance. And there the orchestra played with on the piano Percy Tew. Percy Tew was the pianist, and he played. And they used to dance there. I was too young to want to dance in those days and wouldn't have done, but it was a very, very popular place.
They used to dance also. Jimmy Jinks used to have a dance.
That was where the Marple Legion is placed now. And that was an interesting... Mrs. Jinks used to sit in the office there, and that was turned into a dance hall. And I remember one Saturday night when I was a youth with Ronnie Fawcett, another Marple youth, we said, come on, let's go up to the Jinks's dance hall. It was a bit risky because, it was a bit of funny. Let's go and see what's happened. Let's go and dance there. So Ronnie Fawcett and myself went up there and went in at the door and put our face down to Mrs. Jinks was behind the counter there, and we said, shilling on it too, and we said, hello Freddie Winterbottom and Ronnie Fawcett, do you mothers know you're here? And we said no. She said, right, off you go, you're not coming in. and she wouldn't let us in. No, she wouldn't let us in.
Can you tell us a bit more about your early school days in Marple? You know?
Yes, well, in my school days in Marple, I went to the Albert School, and that was on Stockport Road, by where Market Street came into into Church Lane, and that was the Albert School. And yes, I remember the Miss Dobson was one of the teachers there. Her father was the coachman at Marple Hall. And as the squire came up into Market Street in this open landau coach, there was Dobson sitting on top, driving the horses, and he had a special rig out on with a cocked hat. It's a tall hat on. Yes, Dobson. Miss Dobson, yes. She was a bit ratty, but Pennington was the headmaster, and as I said, he was a bit of a tartar. When he picked Freddie Hoole and myself, we had to be the first boys to take scholarships for Macclesfield. I say he used to have to go up to his house for private coaching. That was in Church Lane. And there we sat at the table, and he sat at the table with his book in front of him and a cane at the side. That was private coaching. We can still get it. But yes, there were a few tough lads there, I remember. And I don't remember much about the school. I remember I had my first fight there. I remember the boy now, and yes, I got a beating. And then, oh yes, in Church Lane, at the top, opposite the Atter's Arms, lived a pal of mine, Tilley he was called, Frank Tilley. And his father was a man who used to help every time any people were changing houses. He used to help to furniture changing, you know, and that kind of thing. And we always said, we was told, he was the strongest man in Marple. And the story was told that once, when they came to a house and had to move a piano out of the house, down the steps to put into the removal van, it was an upright piano, and it was an awkward house to get round the corner, something. And he was at one end, and his pal was at the other, and they were having difficulty, and Tilling said, "Out of the way!" And we always told the story that Father Tilley carried the piano out of the house himself. Anyway, there it was. Lastly, just one final thought, perhaps. When we lived in Marple, in those young days, what was it like before buses? Before there were any buses? How did we get out of it? When we wanted to go, let's have a look. How do we go to Manchester? Oh, well, that was simple. We went to Manchester by train. There was no other way. Yes. What about Stockport? How do we go to Stockport? Well, with my parents, I often went to Stockport. And more than once I walked to Stockport on the road. And then came a time when we would walk to Offerton Fold, and there was a horse-drawn carriage to meet us, long before the trams. And there you could go the rest of the bit into and come out the same way by horse-drawn carriage. Well now, New Mills. How did people in Marple, if they want to go to how did they get to New Mills? Fair enough, walked on the canal. Why not? It was flat. And there it was. Romilly? Yes. Again. Walk on the canal. That was easy. But what about a place like Glossop? Now, when I was a boy, we often wanted to go to Glossop because my parents came from Glossop, both my father and mother. And my grandparents were in Glossop, and my aunts and uncles were still in Glossop. So we often wanted to go to Glossop. But there we were in Marple. How did we get there? Well, what we used to do, if you wanted to go by train, it was just possible. Train from Marple to Guidebridge. Change the platform, wait, I don't know how long, until the Sheffield train from Manchester to Sheffield came. We could get on that and go to Dinting Station and change platforms at Dinting Station, and there will be a little train to take us down the single line to Glossop. Otherwise, which we usually did, we used to walk. And I've been, by my parents, I've been pushed in a pram many times, and a trolley, to Glossop. And as I grew up, of course, we would walk. And I used to love walking until we got to the Rock Tavern, because that was terribly important to me, because we would stop it there. And although my father and mother were strict teetotalers, I could have a lemonade. So even today, when I pass by in the car, I can still taste the lemonade as I pass through there. Well, I am afraid that's the sort of Marple I remember. Thank you for listening.